And we are live, and welcome back to the writing stream. Thanks everybody for being here. I am joined tonight by special guest Jack Mann, the author of Gravity's Arrow. We'll introduce him in a moment. I'm hoping everybody can see things on the screen. I can see Jack on screen, which is good as well. So fingers crossed the technology is going to behave itself as per usual. I've just noticed that the chat isn't working quite well. Let me just fix that. There we go. So there's a problem with this technology. There we go. It's sitting on top. Excellent, excellent. Right, we must do, before we just introduce Jack, who's been waiting patiently for me for the last 10 minutes, we must do the thing because the thing is the thing, and we always do this on the stream. I have to welcome everybody who's already here. It's just a tradition that we do. So welcome to Arrakis. Ready to invade the Harkonnens. No, defending against the invasion of the Harkonnens. That's what we always say. M.A.B.L.E is here. Commander JL1988 is here. The Harkonnens are here, ready to invade Arrakis as per usual. Anne-Marie from FPB is here. Welcome to you, Anne-Marie. Always good to see you. Commander Terraformer Glenn is here as well. M.A.B.L.E is here. El Mundo de Hades is here. 5 Alarm 799 NLF is happy as well. That's a username and a half. Thank you for that. Alan is here as well. The Shadow Wyvern is here. Commander Dustthorn is here. The Jeej is here. Penny Grub from FBP is here as well. Hello, Penny Grub. It's always good to see you. Commander Tragic Blue is here as well. And there's a first time chat from Nut and Special. DJ Squibby is here as well, and the first time chat from CP Louise. Good to see you all. Welcome to the writing stream as well. So, for no further ado, let me bring Jack in because he's patiently waiting up there in the top left-hand corner of the screen, and he can't say anything because I've got him on mute, which is very, very mean. So, hang on, let me introduce him. I'm going to press the button, and with a bit of luck, if I could press the right button, we should be able to hear you. Jack, can you say hello? Are you there?
Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Let me just adjust the volume slightly. There we go. There's always some technical issues to start with on the stream, but that's good. Fantastic to see you, Jack. So welcome to the writing stream. It's fantastic to have you on board. So, can I intrude on you initially? Give me 30 seconds. Who is Jack? Just introduce yourself to the world.
All right. So, in this capacity, I'm the author of Gravity's Arrow, a science fiction novel with a fantasy sort of feel, and published by Fantastic Books Publishing. And that's what I'm mainly here to talk about. The rest of me, I'm a dermatologist, consultant dermatologist, doctor, working in London, in the NHS and privately, and also a father of 3, and I'm a martial arts enthusiast as well.
Wow. Okay, so that's a stack load of stuff. Well done. I'm impressed. I'm particularly glad actually to hear that you've got a science fiction novel with a fantasy feel, because that's right up my street. And actually, I have read Gravity's Arrow, so and I did enjoy it enormously. So that's a great start. So that was a fabulous book. So we're basically here for the next hour and a half. Now there are people in the chat. Now I'm afraid you can't see the questions and the chat that wanders up on the screen. So what I will do is I will forward any. Well, hopefully mostly sensible questions. There will be doubtless a few that are chucked in which are very off, just weird because it's the internet. But and we get some funny people on here sometimes. Well, we get some funny people on here all the time. Most of them are quite funny, but it's all good. It's all good. The nice thing though is that everybody's an enthusiast of writing. Some of the people on here are published authors as well, so it's a very, very friendly audience as well. So for those of you who are in the chat, if you'd like to ask Jack any questions about his book during the stream, then please do, and I'll refer them on. We'll start with that. So I mean, Gravity's Arrow then, Jack. Is that your first book, or is it one of several?
It is my first, but I intend it to be one of many. And
fantastic.
Yeah, I started writing it properly in 2010. I think I spent ages editing it. Children came along, which slowed it down a bit, but Fantastic Books took it up and published it in 2019, and it's I'm really proud of it.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I mean, I must admit, I've read it, and I think it's a fantastic story. But it sounds like it was a long time in, like you say, long time in editing, long time in sort of thinking and things. Did it, is it a story that's been around in your head for a long, long time, and it just took a while for it to turn into text, or is it something that occurred to you on the spur of the moment in 2010 and you just I'm going to write it? How did it get started?
The journey was that even when I was a small kid, I remember my parents talking about certain books and stories they really loved, like Lord of the Rings and that kind of inspired me to think writing a good story would be good. I liked science fiction and fantasy, and I think as a kid, even in primary school, I was often doing a lot of creative writing, just writing stories that I felt would be interesting. I went to a school where I was lucky, and we were encouraged to just write whatever we wanted to write, as opposed to write about such and such. And so I used to really get carried away, write epic exercise book long stories about
Excellent.
various things. And then as a teenager, I thought, I must try and write a novel, and had lots of ideas, which I think were okay in hindsight still, but I struggled mostly with seeing them through to completion, having already worked out what was going to happen at the end. And I would kind of, struggle to kind of really motivate myself to get through to the end. And I'd also struggle with being, 13 or 14 and not knowing enough about the world to write authoritatively about some of the things that I was trying to write about. And then on my gap year, I decided to try and write a book without thinking too far ahead. In fact, without thinking far ahead at all. So I feel in some ways that book was the spiritual, ancestor or whatever of Gravity's Arrow. But in that book, as I wrote it, I kind of wrote myself into situations where the plot couldn't make sense. In particular, I wanted there to be some enemies that would be very difficult to overcome. And I thought, why don't I make cyborgs? And then I thought, if the cyborgs are better than the people, then wouldn't the robots be better than the cyborgs? And wouldn't the ultra robots be way better than the people? And then we'd have a story about robots fighting each other, and that didn't really appeal to me. And then I sort of stopped that, but I got further than it ever got before, and I enjoyed doing it a lot. And I spent medical school thinking a lot about the kind of universe I could write a story in, where it was science fiction but felt like fantasy, and the choices and sacrifices of the characters would have meaning and impact, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And eventually came up with my kind of higher concept universe rule set, and then I thought through what was going to happen roughly at the end, and then I sort of, sorry, it's quite a long answer here.
Yeah, that's all right. That's good.
Then I had a gap between two jobs, so I finished my very junior doctor phase, and I had a 2-month gap before my next sort of middle grade doctor level jobs. And I realized, or someone actually said, I thought, what am I going to do with myself? I should get a locum job. And this guy said, why don't you just do something you've wanted to do your whole life? And I thought, oh yeah, I'll write my novel. And so I blitzed it and wrote a draft, and kind of seat of my pants style got through to the end, because I kind of knew where it was going roughly, but I didn't know how it was going to play out. And I really liked doing it that way. And then had something to work with for the next, 9 years, whatever it was.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds like that's quite an evolution of ideas, but you've had the ideas percolate. Yeah, some of the initial ideas, I guess, percolating really around since very, very young age, which is quite cool actually. I must admit, I have a similar thing. There's a few bits and pieces of my stories which are very, very ancient, if you like. I've kind of like I'll use that now, and I wrote it maybe 25, 30 years ago sometimes. Like, okay, that little bit is okay to use, and it's kind of been percolating around. So that's really, really good. So talk to me a little bit more. I mean, I think I get it, because I really like an idea of a fantasy universe with a sci-fi background. But what sort of prompted you to do it? You sort of said your parents were into Tolkien and things like that. So what sort of inspirations would you say are behind your work? What sort of stuff would you have in the background and go, oh yeah, that's probably where I've been inspired by, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think I like so I guess one thing was I didn't want it to get too scientific, as I said. I didn't want it to be a story about robots and computers. Yeah. And then I think, but at the same time, I felt that with fantasy, although I like Tolkien and lots of fantasy, one of the issues is, I guess, you're making a definite suspension of disbelief. You know this could never happen. Whereas if you have some sort of science fiction basis of it, you could entertain the idea that maybe it could happen, which just slightly pushes you into the edge of maybe buying into it a bit more. Examples of books that I've been inspired by that do that kind of thing: Dune by Frank Herbert. Obviously, they got rid of the computers by having some religious war against them. Yep. There's the Saga of the Exiles by Julian May, which I read when I was a teenager, and I really loved that a lot, actually. And it's science fiction, but they travel back in time to ancient history where there's, and I think, I guess the aliens on the world that might have brought with them fancy technology have kind of spurned that for religious reasons as well. And then what else? Anathema by Neil Stevenson,
Okay.
and
Yeah. That's good. Yeah.
feels very much like that. Sort of it feels very sciencey, but it's also kind of general vibe is quite fantasy sort of thing. I like that as well.
Okay, interesting. So it's a
Yeah.
good mix of inspirational authors as well. I was also pleased to hear that you had the permission to go write stories from your English teachers. That's that's an excellent thing while at school. That's very cool. Yeah. I was lucky too. I had an English master. I went into English. Well, it was O level, of course, in my days, which shows you how old I am. But I went into English class having never been any good at it at all. And I remember my first day in secondary school. I think it must have been. I was probably about 13, and we were told just to write a story. And I was like, everyone in the classroom was like, "Oh, great! Well, really?" And I was like, "Okay, well, that sounds quite fun, actually." So I wrote a story, and I remember getting my textbook back. Back in those days, and it would be marked, and I'd got an A, and I was like, I'd never got an A in anything before. It was a big deal, and he basically said, "Great story." He said there was loads of grammar and punctuation problems, all sorts of things I had to learn, but he actually said, you great story. So it was the first time somebody ever said to me, actually, yeah, that was good, which was a big deal back when I was 13. So good school teachers are an important thing, I think. We have had a question in actually from Penny. So question on early drafts. I wrote myself into a total corner once. I gave the bad guy such a good alibi that no one could break it, including me. It almost unshipped the book. Have you ever written yourself into a total dead end like that?
Well, the main one was when I was doing that one on my gap year, when I realised that for the main characters to have any chance of surviving the story, they'd need to be superhuman or robots or something. So I guess in a way that's what I felt was my plot hole for my first book. And then, or that one I was trying to write in my gap year. And also, I guess because I was trying to write without thinking too far ahead, it wasn't really, I didn't know where it was going, I was sort of trying to, and I was having sort of, it wasn't really making sense. I don't remember the exact details of that. But in terms of, I guess at the moment for my sequels, I've been a bit more methodical about plotting how they work out, if only because it's going to be, well, it's a risk of being complicated. And yeah, I mean, with that process, there's a lot of trial and error. I'll think of a scenario which would make a lot of sense in some ways, but then there'll be some issues. If that was the rule set, if that was what was going on, surely the bad guy would just do this and win or whatever, and that kind of thing. So, but I've never got as far as writing that much, probably, and then getting really stuck. Not yet.
That's good. That's good. So would you? I mean, there's two kind of general definitions of this. There's what's called plotters and pantsters. So plotters are people who work everything out in advance, and then they start writing, and there's no surprises. And pantsters are going, no, I'll just the ether will inform me as to how I write this novel. And there's both have their proponents, and both have their people who don't like those sort of approaches. But where would you put yourself on that scale, do you think?
Yes, I'm struggling with this because the last book was very much pantster. Then I mean, I sort of plotted broadly what was happening, but then I pantstered it the way through, and then I edited it a lot and ironed it out. This second set of books, because it's going to be at least a trilogy, I plotted it out very well and then started writing it. Admittedly, there's more life pressures these days, but I did feel some of the enthusiasm may have been sapped by the fact that I do know what's going to happen quite, deliberately.
So there's an element then that not knowing how the story is going to pan out is an inspiration to keep writing. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. And so what I'm doing, I'm just taking a bit of distance now and hoping to go back and write a bit more uncertainly, maybe doing a whole new fresh draft or something, and just see where that takes me, see if it gets me to the end, and then I can mix it all up again and get it to look nice at the end. That's what my current plan is, to try and bring back the seat of the pants sort of emotional enthusiasm for the writing.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. I just had a thumbs up from the Big Boo on stream. Basically says, just want to say I'm halfway through Gravity's Arrow right now, and I'm loving it. Wonderful characters, and I love all questioning from Fyro in the face of constant thanks. Just believe from everyone. That's really good. So now I must admit, I read your story and I really enjoyed it. So I think one of the things that you've got in there is really strong characterization, which I always prefer in this kind of novel. So where are you drawing your characters from? Are they aspects of people you've seen, or are they just your imagination, or have you sort of taken aspects of things from other books? You know, where do you get your characters from?
I know there's one character, and I won't say who he is in case the person who it's somewhat inspired by realizes. But yeah, there's definitely.
Excellent.
I remember thinking this seems a bit unbelievable, but I know someone who does this kind of stuff, so I'll just put it in there. And then otherwise, yeah, I haven't really thought it through too specifically. I would say it's more that the characters, I think they do sort of just come to me a bit. Yeah, I haven't thought about that too much. I guess it's definitely inspired by people I know, people I've met, but not
So
specifically anyone.
all the names have been changed to protect the innocent and the guilty. I like to say.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's lots of praise for. Is it Fyro? Is that how you pronounce it?
I've always said Firo. I've also always said Credate, but everyone's saying Credate and Fyro. But
I must admit, I must have. I was Fyro. I thought it was Credate because I like to have like a circumflex or something on the e. But that's the way I would pronounce it. But not everybody agrees on those sort of things. But that's what's quite cool, isn't it? It's only until you make an audio book that you kind of cement it in. It kind of, in stone. That's what it will sound like. So that's quite good. So that's excellent. So tell us about Gravity's Arrow then. So it's your first novel that you've had published, and we'll go into that in a little bit deeper. So what's the story about? Give us the not so much the synopsis because we don't want spoilers, but give us maybe a kind of expanded blurb perhaps. What can you do there?
So it's about a boy struggling with his beliefs as he tries to survive in a galaxy on the verge of war. There's an evil religious empire trying to take over the galaxy, and a lot of the great powers of the galaxy have focused on the fact that on a faraway planet there's some discovery that may have significance in the sort of galactic power struggle. The main character and his family actually officially belong to the same religion as this evil religious empire, but the family's take on the religion is more peaceful, and the religious empire is a more kind of aggressive, our way or die sort of vibe. So the main characters are trying to, to some extent, thwart, first evade, but then ideally somehow thwart the intentions of the empire.
Okay, so that's an excellent setup. So interesting to me because I've done something, I suppose, probably not similar, but in a similar sort of spirit, perhaps in the books I've written. Is the talking about religion as a thing in a sort of science fiction / fantasy context? Why is that important to you to explore that? Why does that kind of get you fired up as a topic for writing a book?
As in religion?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I struggled with beliefs and the big questions, what is the meaning of life? Is there a God, is there a heaven, as a teenager? And I thought, I've always felt that was really important stuff to think about and talk about, and I really like thinking about it and talking about it. So it inevitably found its way into my books. I was raised in a religion. I challenged it. I don't belong to any specific religion now, but I do have ideas and beliefs and things. And I do like engaging in conversations with reasonable people who will talk and listen and
talk about those sort of things. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, about these things. I like it. But I recognize it's not for everyone. Some people get upset, and so I try and be careful.
Yeah, I mean, people can get quite upset. You have to be a bit careful about those sort of topics. But it's interesting. That's what I think is nice about a science fiction fantasy setting, because if we invent I mean, my Shade Target. Originally I'd written that in a contemporary setting, at least bits of it, and then I thought I just can't go there with this because it's this that's so quick, move it into a fantasy realm, which seems a lot safer. So you can talk about religion, can't you, in a fantasy setting, because it's not a real religion; it's something you've made up, which gives you a bit more safety to, I suppose, ask questions about it when nobody can be offended because it's not a real thing. So it's. I mean, I can sympathise with that a lot. I mean, I went to a, I grew up, with parents who took me along to church regularly, as a Protestant sort of Anglican kind of a it was very unchallenging church. You sort of went along, sat there for an hour, really bored in the cold, listened to a few things, chanted a few things, and went home again. But people did talk about God and heaven and hell and all these sort of things. So those concepts quickly came along. But my dad was also very scientific, and he took me along to Carl Sagan's lectures back in the 70s and things like this, which was great. So I got both world views from a very early age. So that what you mentioned about the conflict between the two kind of things is very much, I think, a thing that's inspired me in my writing, which is good to hear from other people as well.
Yeah. I was raised Catholic, went to church. I remember having initially silly issues like I wanted to wear a cap in church, and everyone said, "No, you can't do that." And I thought, well, why not?
God will be annoyed, clearly.
Yeah.
It is strange. It is strange. Anyway, we've a few more questions popping up. Penny first says, Firo or Firo, depending on how we're going to pronounce it. I think which either way, you know which character it is a great character. There we go. So apparently worthy of sitting on the same platform as Kiri, Zolo, and Maru. Which, well, there you go. I mean, high praise indeed, I hope. So that's good. Stumpy wants to know where the audiobook is. So you clearly need to get on with that at some point.
Yeah, so you recorded your own, didn't you?
Yep.
And I know. I guess when my wife finishes her PhD, she's very good at this kind of thing, so I could try and work on her to do it.
To record. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. We could talk about audiobooks a little bit later, but the interesting thing between ebooks and paperbacks and audiobooks, and I think there's a demographic thing coming into age now where more and more people like to consume things in Audible because and that's Audible as in not the trademark, that's just listening. Because you can do it on the move while you're doing other things and while you're commuting and all that sort of stuff.
I'm guilty of doing this.
I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't think you should apologise for it, because I think if you really think about it, the tradition of telling stories to each other probably started around campfires, thousands of years ago, right? And we didn't write them down then; we did them verbally. So you could argue that an audiobook is the oldest and best way of telling a story. We've codified it into books. So I don't know, but what I've certainly noticed that audiobook versions of my stuff are very popular compared to the ebook and the paperback stuff. It's definitely a way for people that they enjoy consuming stuff. Anyway, so that's that question. One from Glenn here, Commander Terra Firma. Did you find the plotting planning part of the sequel more challenging, trying to tie it into the first, i.e. keeping your lore consistent, or did you have a plan for sequels before you wrote the first book?
I guess I planned before I wrote the first book, so the universe setup was such. I designed it in a way that I would feel it quite easy to write into that universe without having to think. So I knew the rule set was quite ingrained, and I guess, I mean, in terms of that rule set, so I made some internally consistent rules that kind of had a valid theory to it, if you like, or a theory, and stuck to that, and then was able to then track. Well, a colleague of mine at work, his brother had a PhD in theoretical physics, and we all came up with a theory that actually explained what I'd already kind of done.
Okay, nice. Excellent. Yeah, so you actually ran some of your stuff past a genuine physicist. Excellent. That's a really good idea. Yeah.
So then he kind of came up with a kind of scientific explanations, as it were. So I had the kind of rules that which were kind of consistent, and therefore a theory could become up for them, and then he did that with me and his brother, and so that's on the website.
Okay.
www.gravitiesarrow.com, and it's also, I think it's in the appendix as well, of the special edition, which is the version that's on sale on Amazon right now.
Excellent. Okay, so I mean that's an interesting thing actually. I did something a little bit similar myself. I ended up hunting down. Well, I found a book online which was all about exoplanets and habitability of red dwarf, environments and places like that. And I remember reading this, thinking, this is excellent. This is exactly what I need. I found this sort of Bible, which is full of factual stuff that I can use. And I tracked down the author, and basically sent him an email saying, I'm writing a fictional book on one of these kind of worlds. Can I bombard you with a few questions? Would that be okay? And he actually was really gracious. He sent me loads and loads of stuff, most of which I didn't understand because it was like super technical. But yeah, we actually struck up a good relationship where we actually now swap each other's books whenever we come out. So he writes a new book, and then I send him a copy of mine, and vice versa. So it's really good. So yeah, but
people are quite helpful, aren't they? Though, because
they are. It's nice. Yeah.
I was writing about at the start of the book, they're on a bird traveling over a mountain range, and I remembered, I don't even know what the society was. I should credit them probably. I emailed some piloting gliding society out of some, probably not even the UK, and they just replied saying, yeah, that seems reasonable, and then another time I contacted the Space Centre in Leicester for some advice on something, and they were very helpful too.
Oh, brilliant.
So, yeah, people
Okay.
are quite nice.
Yeah, and I think they quite like the idea of writers, putting little bits of them, their advice into books and stuff. It's I don't know, sort of small piece of immortality perhaps. It's quite attractive to them. So that's really good. Right, okay. So Ojinge13 says, well, after that description, I've had to go and buy it. So there you go. Sounds like you sold a copy of a book while we were live. That's brilliant. Thank you, Ojinge13. That's excellent. So right. So how are we doing? The chat's talking about pronunciations of Lakai, which is a choice I used in my book. So basically because I studied Latin at school, it's just sort of stuck with me. That's the way I've done that one. But
so, I mean, I'm audiobooking my way through Shadewood. I'm on book 2, and so I know how you pronounce everything. I just have no idea how you spell these words now. So.
To translate, so we can always stick out translate. So I mean, talk about Shadewood for a moment. I'm aware that you're in the midst of it, so nobody is allowed to give any spoilers to Jack. So no spoilers in the chat, okay? So did you pick up Shadewood because it was another fantastic kind of books thing, or did you come across it elsewhere?
Oh no, I picked it up because of that, and I kind of came to be aware of you.
Yep.
But I think my main early memory of you was at a Fantastic on virtual reality or something. But anyway, never mind.
Okay, a few years ago. Yeah. Okay, excellent.
Yeah. And then then I read Reclamation, which was the
Elite one. Yeah,
that was pretty good. And then I started on Shadewood, and I'm just starting. I'm halfway through, or more than halfway through the second book of Shadewood now. And there's a lot of similarities I was realizing as I was reading the second book in particular between our work. So
that's why I was quite keen to talk to you. And I'd read Gravity's Arrow. I remember thinking, well, this is really good. This is exactly my sort of book, because it was exactly up my street. So I think if people, I mean, certainly for those of you on the stream who've read Shadewood and enjoyed it, I can thoroughly recommend Gravity's Arrow because it's in a similar sort of a vein, I think. Even though there's absolutely no collaboration, is there? We haven't we haven't spoken before about this, but so that's good. But so I mean, is it a bit strange reading something that is maps a bit closer to home, or
it's nice? I like it. So it's got this fancy sci-fi thing going on. It feels very fancy, but I know there's science behind it, and then you've even got like an ancients, with lost technology, that sort of thing, which I've got in mind. And religions, and you've got flying beasts which people ride, which is happening in my stories too. So there's a lot of stuff that's quite similar, actually.
Yeah, I must say, when I saw the cover of your book, I thought, hang on a minute, what's going on here?
So it's funny when I was trying to get published and noticed and stuff, trying to sell people this idea that it was fancy and sci-fi or whatever. It seemed to. It'd be a bit of a struggle sometimes. I'd go to a writing group, and I remember going to one writing group, and I read out, I read out the beginning of one chapter or something, and one guy said, "Oh yeah, this sounds like fantasy. I'm going now," and leaves or something. I thought,
that's harsh.
Yeah.
How?
And I wasn't allowed to reply until after everyone had given their feedback, so I wasn't able to say no.
Yep.
But it's interesting. But I think it's great. I love this idea.
Well, I've gone on to a few writing groups, various other bits and pieces, and there are some people who get a bit sniffy about science fiction and fantasy. I find, it's like it's not quite proper writing or something. It's like really. So that's just a curiosity. And my biggest problem with Shadewood originally was, when somebody would ask me, well, is it science fiction or fantasy? And I would say yes. And They go, no, it's got to be one or the other. I said, no, it hasn't.
Yeah.
Define science fiction for me. You see, and I wrote Shadewood because I had a very specific idea in mind of what I wanted to do, and I wanted to juxtapose religion and technology, and I wanted a scientifically plausible environment. But there's no reason in my head why a scientifically plausible environment had to be high tech. Shadewood, at least probably to the point where you've got to, is at the moment very low tech. There's hints of more advanced technology lurking about, but it doesn't work. It's busted. It's ancient. It's kind of all rotting in the corner. And the characters are slowly unpicking what's been going on in the background. But clearly there was some advanced tech, but it's kind of gone. It's got left to rot and ruin. But that's a perfectly reasonable thing in science fiction. It doesn't have to be current and working. And so I say, is it science fiction? Well, it is, because it's based on science. But, the problem is my characters are running around with swords and bows and arrows and flying reptiles, which is much more kind of, I suppose, a fantasy sort of thing. So I personally find the whole genre thing a bit of a waste of time, because it's like, well, it's not really in a genre at all. So take your pick.
I feel like it's science fiction, but it would appeal to fantasy enthusiasts. I feel is.
And my biggest issue with the genres is I've had people at conventions and stuff come up to me and say, so what's your book about then? I'll explain it. Oh, it's a fantasy novel. And I said, well, no, it's not. I said, well, I don't read fantasy novels. And it's like it's kind of a Clark punch. But I like science fiction. And I said, well, then you'll like this. But you said it was a fantasy novel. I didn't say it was a fantasy novel. You said it was a fantasy novel. I've had a few people who've been open-minded enough to basically go, all right, I'll give it a whirl. And then they've come back to me and say, I absolutely love this. It's brilliant. And I said, what you probably like then is the fact it's all about people, and it's all about characters, and it's all about emotions, and it's all about people arguing about stuff. The setting in some ways is less important, I think, to those strong characters. And that's what I really liked about your book, is it's like, I'm liking these characters. They're not perfect. They've got issues, or they're too young, or they're not mature enough, or they're indoctrinated, and all those sort of things. I like that when the characters are relatable. And I think that's a big deal.
I've had that feedback as well. People saying that my book is like it's a people story as well as a science fiction fantasy story. There are people that matter, and same with your books. You've got strong characters and things that you can relate to. So I think that is. It makes it much more accessible, much more enjoyable, much more relatable to, and helps you.
It's story. That's right, and I think that's a big. That's what I particularly enjoyed about your stories and the way you were telling them, is it was a people focused thing. So big question for Big Boo here is both of you. A question for both of us. Hang on, I'll let you go first. Do you tend to write books you would enjoy yourself, or is that just how authors work? So. Do you write books that you yourself would enjoy? Is that there's a question for you.
Yes, for me that's my main test of whether I should write it. I'm conscious that not everything appeals to everyone. In fact, you mentioned teachers encouraging me to write. They did, but there was also one time when I wrote a long story or like many pages of novel when I was about 12 or 13. My mum gave it to a teacher who really didn't like it at all, and said as much. I'm aware that
it's your first bit of criticism there. That's probably valuable.
I'm aware that you can't please everyone with fiction or any kind of writing, and to try and please everyone would, I'm sure, be pretty boring. So, I write what I would like, and I mean, I guess to some extent I'm conscious of. And certainly through the writing process, and since I've become more conscious of what works well with people who are not yourself reading your own book, because I guess really, if I was writing straight for myself, I could do things in a very different way. But I'm trying to write for myself if I was not myself, as it were.
Yeah. Okay.
And how about yourself?
Yeah, no, I think I'm probably in the same boat. I tend to write things I like. I wrote Shadewood because I couldn't really think of anything else that I'd read that was doing that particular story.
Yeah.
So that's kind of thing. I mean, Anne McCaffrey probably is the closest, I think.
I have read one of those.
Those are really, really good. I like those. She was a big inspiration for my kind of the way I do
Okay.
things. But yeah, so I like the Shapewood Saga. It's not a book I wrote. I'm like, oh God, I never gonna have to read that again because that's awful. I wrote it for somebody else. No, I wrote it because I wanted to write it, and I think a lot of writers probably do. I mean, it makes sense that you would only write something that kind of appealed to you. I don't think I could write, if somebody said, right, Drew, you've got to write a book which is on this topic against this subject and we'll give you some money. I don't think I could do that because I just would never I'd be so bored. I'd just never get to it. I have to be happy and inspired by the thing I'm writing about, and it has to be fun. Otherwise, I just wouldn't do it. I mean, I suppose it depends how much money, but
Yeah, that could be a motivator.
yeah, exactly.
If they give me a topic and I was allowed to take it wherever I wanted to, and do something unexpected, that would be okay. But I think if they're quite strict on what you're supposed to write, then that would be a trouble. That would be difficult.
That is harder. It is harder, isn't it? Okay, so that's good. Just catching up. There's another question here. I've only just realised that you both have flying animals that people ride in the books. They're totally different and possibly more prominent in Shapewood than Gravity's Arrow. But why that form of airborne transport? So what? Yeah. So anyway, so tell us, for anybody who doesn't know, because some people won't have read Gravity. What are the flying creatures that you have in Gravity's Arrow?
So the scientific theory thing that goes behind this is that the technology that allows faster than light travel are these crystals, and when they're in use they interfere with electronic items.
Okay.
And the details of this is on the website.
But right, okay. I like the way you've got like a lore guide on your website. I might have to, that's a really good idea. I might pitch that.
So therefore you can't even have an internal combustion engine necessarily, and well, you don't, and you probably could get away with a steam engine probably.
Right.
But
certain types of technology are rendered inoperative by the use of these crystals.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So what you can do is have a place that's far away from the crystals, and you can do very clever stuff with AI or whatever you want there. And there is AI in the universe, but it's just far removed from where the people are in the story. So with that technology, they can do high-level genetic engineering, and they've engineered birds that are massive that you can fly, and dragons that you can fly, dragons that can attack people, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And also big kind of land-based animals you can ride, that kind of thing. So the main characters, I think they start off the book in chapter 1 flying across some mountains to get to work. So it's just kind of daily life, really, flying birds and dragons or whatever.
It's just a cool thing to have, isn't it? Flying.
I just thought it was a really great idea having, as on the front cover, people flying dragons with machine guns. Yeah, I thought that would be cool.
Dragons with machine guns. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I mean, for me, that one was. I just remember thinking, and this might be minor spoilers for you actually, if you haven't got to this part of book 2. But I just remember quite early on going, I want to have a duel between a flying machine and a flying creature. So it's one of those things in my head. I said I've got to have a flying machine and I want a flying dragon type thing, right? And I thought, well, I can't make it a dragon because that pushes me way too far into the realm of kind of classic fantasy tropes. So I don't want a fire-breathing dragon. And I thought I'd be stepping on dear Anne McCaffrey's toes a bit if I put a dragon anyway. So I thought, no, it's not going to be a dragon. So what's the next step down from a dragon? Well, it's a sort of pterodactyl-like creature, big enough to fly. And then I did a bit of research into pterodactyls, and some of them, on Earth are pretty big. But none of them are big enough that you could fly them. They're just not robust enough. So either they have to be even bigger, or I came up with a solution on Shapewood is that the gravity is actually a little bit lower than it is on Earth, so you don't need to have so much lift to take off, and the air is a little bit denser for various different reasons. So then I sort of solved some mechanical problems. And I thought, what am I going to call them? And it was very, very simple: pterodactyl, DAC. That was it. And the reasons for that will become clear at some point in a future sequel novel. But then I thought, well, I can then have people riding them. Who would be riding them? Maybe a special class of people would be riding them. And then I sort of associated that with the priestesses and the witches and stuff. I just thought I also need something because the kind of the protagonists in the story have got a boat that allows them to move around relatively quickly through the story. the kind of antagonists need something that allows them to get around quickly too. Otherwise, I can't keep them all in the same part of the map very easily. And so some of those sort of things are kind of mechanical things for the story to allow the good guys and the bad guys to move around at a reasonable speed and get to interesting places without having to trudge through like 3 chapters of, well, we're still walking. So it was, some of those things are kind of it, and I sort of expanded it from there, I suppose. So that's cool. Right, so another the questions are coming in thick and fast now. Question for both. Okay, so you're both very set on making your stories have a law and science justification. Have you ever been confronted by a reader for a law or science violation in your story? Ow, shot.
I think so. Not yet. I'm looking forward to it. People have challenged. Someone challenged that the bad guys would be that violent, and they said, this idea this religious empire would kill loads and loads of people and make mountains of their heads doesn't seem believable. Which I said, surely that's what's happened before and will happen again. But,
have you not met in some of our religions here? Yeah. Okay, that's what it is. Yeah.
I don't think I've had the science challenge. Yourself? Have you?
I've had one. I've had one big one, which it was an error on my part. I got it wrong, which was in Shadewood. Let me get this right. It's either in 1 or 2, I think. I can't remember exactly where it was, and I must admit I didn't fix it straight away, and I ought to. Basically, I at some point. You know about Caesar, the computer, don't you? Because that's at the end of book 1.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's good.
Basically, plane fight, I think, as well. So.
Oh, you're okay with the plane fight? Excellent. Good. Sorry, potential spoilers. No, so Caesar basically says, I've got some imagery, I think, of the planet, and basically he says something along the lines of, there's a geostationary satellite in orbit, that's still working, providing satellite imagery of the planet's surface. That's how that works, and the crew are kind of like, wow, okay, pictures from space kind of thing. And until somebody pointed out, he says that you can't have a geosynchronous orbit around a tidally locked planet. It doesn't exist. It's not possible. And unfortunately, they were absolutely right, because a geostationary satellite only works around the Earth because the Earth spins around once every 24 hours. And so the satellite has to be at a certain distance to maintain a 24-hour orbit. Unfortunately, the Shadewood planet rotates, I think I worked it out, every 11 days. So the satellite would have to be much, much further out, and it would hit the star on its orbit. So it would work. So I did make an astronomical error, which I'm very, very ashamed of, because I should have spotted it. But
okay.
Somebody called me out on that, and so I fixed it in later novels. Basically said there's a satellite at the Lagrange point, which is like a static point in space, balanced on the gravity between the sun and the planet. So yes, an error that I was called out on.
I have avoided one error potentially. My work, I do surgery on people's skin cancers, and they're awake when I do it, and I do get chatting about a lot of stuff. It's about like being at the hairdresser, a bit more painful maybe.
Yeah.
And so one guy was some sort of physicist or something, and at the time, well, I'd written a book, but I hadn't finished editing it, and it was about, I asked him, if you're in space but you had no electronics with which to work out where you were, but you could plot star positions and that kind of thing, would you necessarily know where you were? Because wouldn't it be difficult to know which stars were necessarily which? And they're like, well, I guess if you moved a distance away, then you'd be able to replot it all out, and then you could have a better idea. And I remember that being something that I did factor into the story and change.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, it's good to have conversations like that do inform, because there's always something new to learn, right? So it's quite good.
Yeah.
One of the writers on the stream, JR1988, says he made a similar mistake to me, and somebody else pointed it out for him, which is good. And Glenn makes the point, actually, geostationary is also specifically about the Earth. The word geo is obviously Latin for Earth, so I definitely doubly wrong there, perhaps.
I guess you can imagine that they'd take that word away with them to the next planet, right?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe. Well, that's kind of where I went. You see, the idea behind, partly it was convenient for me to just name DAX, but they were based on pterodact tools as a kind of key word. And some of the other creatures, I mean, some of them you won't have come across yet, but each one, I mean, there's a small semi-sentient creature called a marsup, which actually I think Zoella kills and eats quite in book one because she's hungry. But marsup is a sort of shrink of marsupial, and that's how I've done most of my animals. They are, corruptions, if you like, of already existing words on Earth. And electricity, for example, which powers the boat, is obviously electricity. The reason those words are the way they are is the unwritten so far backstory to Shadewood is that the initial colonists came down and did name everything, and then they just sort of shortened things for convenience themselves, and those are the names that sort of stuck, thousands of years later. So. And then some things have been kind of corrupted on the way. And I pinched that from Anne McCaffrey as well, because she did a lot of that sort of stuff in her books. So never an original idea, but it gives you a sort of vague sense of familiarity and a little bit, I think, of grounding into the novel. You've got something, okay, I know roughly what that's like then. Yeah. Because somebody else somewhere has probably used the same sort of thing that I would. Oh, it's kind of a pterodactyl-like thing, but pterodactyl is a really hard word to say a lot, so you maybe just shorten it. And that's basically how I've done it.
But that is a thing, isn't it? Because you're writing about something very alien, and I know certain readers like ourselves might really like getting heavily invested into bizarre and strange new worlds, but a lot of people struggle with it to some extent, and having more things to ground one in is
so that's a question I'd like to ask you actually in terms of Shadewood is did you find the world itself somewhere that you could visualize quite quickly, or was it kind of like, I've got to think about this? And
I think I still have to think about it a bit, and because every now and again I think, oh yeah, but I just imagine it's on Earth, and then I realize, I know you've got this situation where it's a very narrow area, and the sun is coming at an angle and all this kind of thing, and they've all adapted their eyes to be infrared visual or whatever. So I do think about it a bit, but there's some really good descriptions and ideas and about what the world looks like, which I really like. But that's nice. I like that. You've got
it's a bit different. Yeah. The biggest thing I had with it really was the navigation side of it. Because I was suddenly thinking, hang on a minute, if you go out to sea, there's no way to tell which way you're facing anymore. You don't have an east and west north time because you've got no movement of the sun. There's no way to tell the time. And the other thing that was really pernicious, and even my editors struggle on this one, is that once you get rid of time in that sort of sense, you don't have today, tomorrow, next week, a week last Thursday, a fortnight. None of those concepts work anymore, so I had to completely re-engineer the language and come up with a mechanism for telling time that A, would work, and B, I could fit into kind of colloquial talk in a way that made sense. And I was trying to balance between working something out that was plausible and also working something out that readers could actually follow. And because once you dump minutes and hours and seconds and months and days, you've got to replace it with something. And so what I did is I invented something that there was basically an analogous between each one. So you could kind of go, okay, when they say that, that's roughly a day. When they say that, that's roughly an hour. And when they say that, that's roughly a month. But it actually had to work as well. It had to actually be a real thing. And it took me quite a while to figure out how to do that. But once I'd cracked it, that was kind of one of the big underpinnings of the book, is to how the navigation, how the time worked.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I remember with the navigation. Have they explained that, or have I just missed it? So,
you should have got that in book one. Yeah, you should have got that in book one. I have to go back and read that. It's basically when Maru figures out how to use the map. That's basically how they suss it out. So that was a question from Penny, actually. Question for Drew: did it cause you any problems to lose all the vocabulary and lots of other stuff related to day and night? Yes, it was a nightmare. Because and you can't. There's an example. I can't say nightmare, right? So what do the characters do when they have a bad dream when they're asleep? Because you can't call it a nightmare. So I called it a sleep terror, I think, in the end. Because you kind of just like swap words. That's the easiest way to do it. Everyone kind of knows what you're talking about there. But lots of little things like that. When you're writing, you don't realise how deeply ingrained in your language the constructs of time and distance and navigation are, and so you instinctively write them. And even when you're editing it and reviewing it, and even when other people are editing it and reviewing it, they don't spot it as a problem because they're so used to that being correct.
Yeah.
That you have to make a real effort to go, actually, no, you can't say that, Drew, because tomorrow is not a thing. So that, it's a tough one. So, thank you. Okay, there's another question there. What is the poster on your left or our right?
That one.
Yep.
That is the other. It's on the website. It's one of the other posters that Raman Marek did for me. So
Okay.
the one that's the front cover, but he also did three other images. Yeah, or three other images. And this one was amenable to another poster that I could bring around with me,
Fantastic.
good.
Okay, so that's not a picture of the sequel book. That's another
No, that's
picture
still
of.
that's when they go to the spaceport and there's like a city. You know, it's not like a Dyson sphere, but there's a sort of thing orbiting a star, and ships go there, and they can harness the fact that that place is very close to the star, and they can get a lot closer to the star by going to that port
Okay.
than they would be able to otherwise without burning up. And they can take the energy from the star quicker that way. And inside these ports are cities where lots of things happen, but the characters do go there near the start.
Okay,
Yeah.
no, it's nice image. It's the imagery is very nice. Ramon, we had.
Yeah, it's very good.
Sorry, I should say Ramon. I think I say. We debate how we pronounce his first name every week. He was on the stream last week actually, which was great. Good fun to chat to him. Very talented guy actually. You know, it's sickening when people can draw and write. I don't think that's fair because I can't do the drawing at all. I'm hopeless. So I'm very envious of people who can create imagery as well as words. Yeah. So that's quite good. So that's good. Question again: has Jack done many promo events in person or things like this before? I suppose the wider question: what sort of things do you do to market your book?
So I've been to. I guess there was a launch at Fantasticon. I went to Worldcon as well to launch it there when it was in Dublin in 2019.
Okay.
And then I did a launch near my house around Christmas 2019. Must have been, and just before COVID, I guess. But so that was we went to a bookstore, launched it there as well, and had a lot of people around for that. That was good. And
nice. Okay.
Otherwise, besides these sorts of things, so I made the website. Oh, I made a video that I put on Facebook and YouTube, which just kind of showcased some of the imagery and highlighted the book and that sort of thing, and some of the Amazon reviews, which were good.
Yep. Oh, fantastic. Yeah. It's always good to have some reviews, and you can kind of use them as future marketing. Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's more or less most of it. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. So, so talk to me a little bit about the characters again. So we got Faro and
so we've got Old John,
Kudate, I would say.
Oh, yeah.
Talk us through what a little bit about those guys and their interactions, because that to me is the kind of heart of the story, I suppose. And some pretty unpleasant things happen to some of them as well. So do you enjoy putting your characters through really tough sort of things, or
I don't get sadistic pleasure out of it, but I do think it's a good sort of way to develop the story and the characters and that sort of stuff.
Yep.
Makes for a better story often. And so with those characters, so Firo, he's trying to make sense of the world and trying to survive, and so I guess he finds himself. They all find themselves kind of thrust in the middle of a kind of important sequence of events. They're in a place where decisions by a small group of people could have a big influence on the galactic power struggle.
Yeah.
The questions about the characters, right? So Firo's journey, he's kind of growing up, I suppose, and trying to survive and do the right thing. His parents are a bit kind of conflicted. So there's Old John and Hanu, and Old John's background. I guess they fled to this place where they lived and brought up their kids.
Yep. And that was quite a strong thing that I really liked early on. Actually, was that there was this sense that we've come away from a bad place and we're trying to put that behind us, and yet unfortunately it caught up with us again.
Yeah. And I feel that's a bit of a message there, because I feel obviously if you're in a bad place, it's good to get away, but it's often these bad things they don't stop being bad, and I guess they try to get away, and then the bad things are catching up with them, and they're sort of wondering if they did the right thing in the first place, because now they may have made it harder for themselves to evade the bad things further, rather than if they just sort of found a way to confront it before, perhaps. So and then they're feeling a bit guilty that their actions are putting their children in danger, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
And
there was a real strong sense of family concern there, particularly in the opening parts
yeah,
of the story, which I thought was a good scene setter, and it also, um, it felt like you were writing that from the perspective of a parent. I don't know if you specifically were, but yeah, some of that came across as very authentic, which I quite liked. So, um,
yeah. And I guess I wrote the book from pre-parenthood to post-parenthood, so
yeah,
maybe I don't know if it's changed, over the course of that time. But and then the other characters, I guess his siblings, they're also kind of growing up, trying to make sense of the world, his older brother feels he should be doing things to make the world or the universe a better place, and feels a bit trapped in that his family have dragged him away from his, what he wanted to do, which was sign up and fight the enemy in the Navy or whatever,
yeah,
or the Air Force. And now he feels kind of frustrated by that, but still wants to do something. And then other characters, there's Emil, who turns up somewhere through the book, who is a bit spoilt,
yeah,
and yeah, and he, doesn't kind of will kind of refuse to see things in any other way than the way he kind of wants to see them, and expects things a certain way, and is a bit of an idiot sometimes, but is generally also quite loyal and well intentioned, really, So and then who else is this? What are the characters? There's the ambassador that they meet, Valacrad,
yep.
who wants to do the right thing by his son, teach his son the ways of the universe, but at the same time, he's on a mission from his empire to uh, try and stop the Credate, and he's happy to engage in political shenanigans and take risks at the same time
I
with
must admit,
those.
the political shenanigans I enjoyed a lot. Actually, that sort of stuff. I was
Oh,
like,
good.
yes, that's really good.
Yeah.
That bit I really enjoyed. So those characters. What's nice about them is they're all sort of flawed, and particularly at the beginning. I mean, you get the sense of who the key characters are, which we're kind of sort of rooting for. But there's always a sense that not it's not goodies versus baddies. Although the kind of religious organisation is painted as quite
Oh, yeah.
bad, I suppose, but it also makes sense from their perspective. That they could basically regard themselves as dealing with a bunch of really really irritating rebels that they're just trying to suppress, because if they can get rid of them, then everything will be fine, surely.
Yeah.
It comes across as very
But yeah, of course,
a bit more nuanced. Yeah. Sorry.
Fira makes friends with the daughter of the ambassador from
Exactly. Yeah.
time.
Yeah. And they strike
You
up
go,
a relationship, which is
yeah,
really nice. In which case, it's almost like you're fraternising with the enemy. You shouldn't be doing
yeah.
that.
Yeah. And of course, the people around him see that as, oh, great, an opportunity to communicate with the enemy secretly and this sort of stuff, and they
Exactly.
kind of
Take advantage of that relationship, which is
yeah,
unfair on the two
I
two
know.
younger people. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
yeah, they are.
yeah, and that's interesting because that resonated with me, because I don't know how far you got with Chambered, but somewhere in book two. But you've got obviously three major
Yes.
characters who you know, and there's a few more
Yeah.
coming into the mix who are slightly less important, but they do go. But I deliberately designed the characters in such a way that you, as the reader, should hopefully sometimes be rooting for them and
Yes.
sometimes going, hang on a minute, what
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
they doing? I don't think I
Yeah.
like this. And they make bad calls, and they do things
Yeah.
wrong, and actually sometimes they're very morally ambiguous entirely. Um,
Yeah.
and they change because of the experiences that they have, which I didn't want to
Yeah.
have. I didn't want somebody to basically, they're the goody and they stay the goody, and those are the baddies and they stay the baddies because they're evil. I really didn't want that. I wanted people in my books that people would go, yeah, what's she doing now? Uh, and have that sort of slightly conflicted view as to whether they actually liked this person or not, or whether they were rooting for them or kind of fearing what they were going to do next. So I don't know if you've got any impressions of the characters thus far as to where you are in the story, but it'd be interesting to hear what you think.
I think I was overhearing you. Was it maybe the talk you had with Raymond, or I think, and you were saying that having the characters maybe turn out to be good, then bad, and this sort of thing. It just got me wondering who's going to do what,
Yeah.
next. And obviously one of the characters has done some pretty suspect things in this book so far, and then yeah, and so I'm wondering though. But then she started doing something kind of that seemed kind of more morally maybe okay, and then I don't know what her journey is going to take it, where it's going to take her, but it's very interesting. And as you said, yeah, it makes it more believable almost, and then it's not straightforward,
Yep.
and bad sort of thing. I like it. It's very good.
Yeah, so I had a lot of fun crafted, and they were deliberately crafted that way. I wanted them to go on a journey where they ended up questioning what they thought they believed, and then reassessing
Yeah,
their world viewpoints based on what they'd learnt. And some of them do, and some of them don't change, obviously, depending on how the story goes. But I'll leave you to discover what happens. So I don't want to do any spoilers. A few reviews of Shadewood that found their people, sympathies moving between the characters. So I start off with, I suppose, some fairly kind of archetypical. That's not quite right. Archetype characters. So Maru is kind of a little bit of Mr. Exposition because he's quite useful for explaining how stuff works and kind of giving you a little bit of the background because he's curious about everything else. He's always asking questions. And I put in Zoella as a softer, more kind of empathetic character, and then put Kiri in as a more aggressive kind of the world's a hard place, so I'm going to be a hard person kind of a character as well. And that's how it all starts, but it doesn't necessarily end up there.
okay.
So I'll leave that one for you. And Penny says one of the things I really liked about Gravity's Arrow were the relationships in Fire's family, very very adroitly done apparently. So that's high praise as well. So and I think you've got that dynamic I like. I really did like the relationship between him and the I've forgotten her name, the daughter of the ambassador. Yes, I thought that was a really, because the moment that happened, I thought, oh, here's trouble, which I thought, yes, this is going to be good. I was listening to that because those sort of relationships where they cut across, religious boundaries or political boundaries or society boundaries, whatever it happened to be. There's potential for massive conflict, because I can see exactly why you did it from a kind of writing process perspective. It's great fun to see that sort of thing, and I've done similar things in Shadewood, and you'll definitely get it. It's is again the sort of drive to put some conflict in the story. Is that something that excites you as a writer?
I feel I remember at some point I took on board the message that conflict does well in stories, generally, and but I guess it just felt right anyway that there'd be conflict. It makes more interesting characters show what they're like more in conflict, as we do in life, and it does bring out more about someone if they're having to deal with something difficult. If it's just easy, then they're not going to really show who they really are they? So
I think sometimes, I mean, I found it with in Shadewood where you put some conflict in, partly to show the reader a little bit, okay, this character really believes what their worldview. They'll defend it, they'll argue it, they'll basically tell somebody else they're wrong, all that sort of stuff. And it hopefully makes the characters a little bit more convincing. Okay, these people really believe that they're right. One of the best pieces of advice I was given for character development was what you've just said, which is there has to be some conflict because it makes it interesting and exciting. But the other one was that nobody thinks they're the bad guy. That's a really quite a useful little lesson I was given. So when you're writing from the kind of antagonist sort of bad guy's perspective, view it from their perspective, and basically they're still right. They think they're the good guys. They think they're doing the right thing, and if you can make it convincing from that viewpoint, then it does make your character very compelling. So certainly in Shadewood, I basically the priestesses, the witches, start out with we're just doing what God has told us to do, and if we don't do it, everyone's going to die. That's what the prophecies say. So who can argue with that, right? And if you argue with it, you're wrong. You need to be cast out and killed and executed and stuff, because obviously you're evil. It gets a bit more sophisticated than that. But nobody being the bad guy. I don't like the kind of, okay, well, they're the bad guy, they're evil. Why are they evil? Well, because that's not good enough for me. So when you had this sort of religious empire, and then you brought together these two people across it in a relationship, I thought this is really nice. I really enjoyed that dynamic. I thought that was really, really good.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
So good stuff there. Oh, and another piece of advice from a well-known author whose name escapes me, from Anne here: give the bad guy the best arguments.
Yes.
Bad guys are fun
Yeah.
to write, though, aren't they?
Yes.
Or kind of antagonists, shall we say? Yeah.
I'm definitely thinking of some good arguments for the bad guys in my sequels. They're gonna have some good cases for their evil ways.
Well, it's almost the point if you can write them so well that people go, you know what, they've got a point.
Oh, yeah.
I always felt that with, I don't know if you've seen the Marvel films, but Thanos, who's this kind of evil guy who basically he wipes out just like that. He basically wipes out half of the population of the entire universe because it's basically getting too crowded. And his solution is just without malice. He just arbitrarily deletes half of the universe, and every so often you go think, yeah, actually, he had a point. And his moral ambiguity on it is quite interesting thing to look at. But I think if you can make the bad guys make sense rather than they're just evil for the sake of being evil, that's really, really good.
Yeah.
That's good. So what's the difference between Gravity's Arrow, the original version, and Gravity's Arrow, the special edition?
Special edition has a glossary and the appendix, and the appendix explains the science theory type stuff. So when I wrote the first book, when I wrote it, the first time, I thought I wouldn't explain it too explicitly in the story, in the hope that people think really hard and try and figure out what on earth was going on. How come you had dragons and guns and whatever and all this sort of stuff, and spaceships, but I think it's a bit of a big ask, really. So the appendix does help people to just understand that it is a science fiction book and there is a reason for it being this way.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So that's interesting. So I think I've got a copy. I must have a copy of the original version. It was quite a while ago. Yeah. Okay, so I might have to go and get it again. Pick that up. See how it goes.
The website has the same information.
Oh, okay. So I need to go and have a look at that. That's a really good idea, actually, having the lore on the website. I like that.
Yeah.
So that's an idea I'll definitely have to pinch at some point. I think that's a really good idea. So I suppose then the next question that kind of comes out of that. So this book took a long time to come to kind of a decent draft state, and you've gone through the process of inspiration and writing it and so on and so forth. So how did you encounter fantastic books?
Yeah, I think what happened. I was touring various conventions, trying to see which ones. Well, trying to make contacts in the writing world and that sort of thing, and I was told about Fantasticon, and I think my mum may have knew Penny Grubb, I think, and so I kind of heard about it from that way, and then I went there and I really liked the place and I really liked the atmosphere and I liked the fact that it was a convention where it wasn't just writing. There was a lot of other fun stuff going on as well.
Yeah, and they do virtual reality and wacky computer games, and there's usually a Nerf gun war as well, isn't there?
Yeah, I like that. That was fun. I remember getting a bit too into that sometimes. Everyone in the head, so then I approached them and I liked the team, and I think I submitted a short story for their 666 Fantabulous as well, which was based on the same universe. So it was called The Sufferers. I shouldn't spoil too much. But,
I haven't read that one. I think I've got 666. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so there's it features the Sufferers, which are kind of mentioned in the story as a sort of bad guy that does have an explanation, although it's not it's not in the bulk of the book sort of thing. It's just it's sort of in there, and so that I did that for them, and I submitted. I think I must have sent them a submission, and then they kind of gave me some feedback to think about before submitting it again, that sort of stuff, and eventually sufficiently impressed them enough, I guess, for them to take me on board and get in there. Yeah, that was really good. Thank you, Fantastic Books.
Fantastic.
And everything,
Awesome. Penny says she was at school with your mum, apparently.
Yeah, that's right.
Say hello to her from me. There we go.
That's
Can't get away from your parents, no matter what you do.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. So yeah, and did it? One of my big experiences with Fantastic Books was my first encounter with their editors, because I mean, obviously, as a writer, we write our first draft, and of course, it's absolutely perfect, right? Yeah, there's no faults with it. Absolutely, there's nothing wrong with it at all. Then you send it off to the editor, and they have the audacity. to scribble improvements or what they think are improvements all over it. So what was your experience of the editing? I'm being flippant, of course, but what was your experience of the editing process?
So I never paid an editor. I kind of used to go to writing groups a lot, and so I found a writing group I had a writing group as early as 2011, I think, and then I
Okay,
got
wow,
into another
yep.
one later on. And so I was used to getting a lot of criticism of my work and kind of taking the feedback and working on it. So, in terms of that wasn't so new, but it was good, and I liked it, and they said a lot of good stuff. And some of the people I'd meet in writing groups were a bit over, like, they'd like say, "Why don't you delete half the book?" sort of thing. I'm like, okay, well, there's killing your darlings and there's sort of outright genocide of books sort of stuff, which I'm not quite ready to do.
Yeah, that's a bit much, isn't it?
I know. I remember one guy saying, "Well, you could start the whole book at this chapter." I was like, "That's chapter 13," and I could see his point, but then it just kind of it was too much, too much for me, and so anyway, so Fantastic Books, yes, they did edit. They were really good. They a lot of good ideas, and there was only like one or two things that I said, "Oh, I'd rather keep that thing."
Yeah.
It wasn't much. Most of it, I was like, "Yeah, fine, good point, and let's do it," sort of thing.
Okay,
Yeah,
well
really,
that's really positive. I mean, my experience was similar actually.
yeah,
There's a few things like you said, no, that's important. I need that.
yeah,
But a lot of the time it was stuff like make this bit a bit punchier because this is an action
yeah,
scene. You don't want people having a
yeah,
long chat about stuff while
yeah,
explosions are going off. That doesn't feel right. Yeah, natural. It's things like that
yeah.
which were very useful,
Yeah.
which I did take on board. Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
that's good.
And they're very nice, very responsive, very quick, and very accommodating. Really, really good to work with, actually.
Yeah,
Like it.
no, that's good as well. The whole kill your darlings thing. So
Mhm.
so death and things like that in novels. Have you how have you found that? Because if you create a character, and
Yeah.
I got to be very careful here, spoilers, because death does happen
Yes.
to characters. So what's your sort of approach? What's your sort of feelings on that one?
So I guess, I feel for Kill My Darlings, I guess it's killing stuff that you like and invested energy into, isn't it? So on the one hand, there's stuff you've written that you can get rid of, and then that's
Yeah,
painful.
yeah,
And then
yeah.
character that you probably invested
I've,
loads of.
I've written this beautiful paragraph and it shall oh
Yeah.
no, it's got to go. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that is painful. I mean, that's part of the reason I wanted to plan the sequels more, because I could avoid some of that pain. But I think maybe it's just part of the thing. You've got to write a load
I
of stuff
think I think
because
it is. I mean, I plan a lot. I'm a proper plotter,
yeah,
but even I write stuff and go,
yeah,
that's not going to work. I always
yeah,
keep it. When I delete it,
yeah,
I cut it and stick it in a document called "not used," and there's some quite good stuff in there which will probably never be used, but you never know. And I always advise people on this stream: don't delete anything. Just cut it and put it somewhere else because you never know. You might want it back. I've had the situation in my work where I've gone, this isn't going to work, and I've cut it. I put it in the not used doc, and then I've gone back a few weeks later and gone, actually, I'm going to go back to my original idea here, and I'm glad I didn't delete it because now I can just copy and paste it back. So sometimes that does happen as well. But yeah, you're right. Sometimes you do just have to. No, that's not going to work.
yeah. I am worse than that. I just keep saving as and changing the file name and making loads and loads of files, and putting them on Dropbox and
Okay.
taking.
Yeah.
That's quite
I,
foolish.
I think I think as long as it works for you. I mean,
Yeah,
the actual kind of mechanics of where and what you save. I tend to have a master document, and I say the way I do it is I have 4 folders usually: first draft, second draft, third draft, fourth draft, and I have a copy of the book in each one of those, and I do it in that order. But I have a not used doc. Anything that I go, I'm not sure that's going to work, I cut it out and stick it in this not used document, which is separate. I don't tend to have separate versions of the original file, if that makes sense, until I've gone past, right, that's the end of my first draft, or that's the end of my second draft, so I know kind of where I am. That's how I do it. But there's lots and lots of different ways of organising that.
yeah. And then as for killing characters, I think yeah, it's tough, isn't it? Because I feel like the target of the writing is to give a good emotional high, I think, in the end, sort of
Yep.
thing. And I guess it's hard to get the high without there being risk of there not having reached the high. And therefore, when you reach the high, when the good things happen, if they do happen, you were genuinely worried they wouldn't happen, that sort of thing. Otherwise, it's not going to mean as much. And
I think if a character's going to die, it has to mean something. It's not just.
yeah,
I found in the classic example nowadays, I suppose, is George R.R. Martin, isn't he? And a few people have quipped on him. You just watch the first episode and watch the last episode, and anybody who's not in the last episode died.
Yeah,
which is.
I've only watched the first episode actually, so I should watch the last one.
And I did find some. I mean, there's a lot of violence in that, and I found that a bit much to watch. But there's so much death and people getting mutilated and killed. I found it a bit of a turn off overall because it just felt excessive to me. And it's like the deaths here feel like they're just deaths in order to shock people about the violence of this realm, and it felt a bit too much that way to me. I mean, that's my opinion of it. But
so like I said, I haven't actually read or watched all of it. I watched the first episode, so I watched the last one. So a lot of people are very surprised I haven't read and watched that. But I think I do feel a lot of fiction in a lot of different media types. They do a lot of stuff to shock people and make you feel, oh my gosh, and as a means to get to you and kind of get some sort of emotional engagement. And I do feel it's a bit excessive sometimes as well. Like they don't need to be that mean and killing children in these films these days. It's like kind of like, where go next?
Where can we go to hype it up even further?
Over the top sometimes.
Yeah, that's a bit tricky. The Big Boo's basically said, thankfully Drew would never kill off a character we all like. Oh, sorry about that, guys. No spoilers. Shh. There's a question. Okay, well, actually, Big Boo's got a question here. Were either of you surprised by any of the editor's suggestions, comments, etc.? Just going back to the editing question. I missed that on the way through. Were you surprised by anything?
Trying to think now. I guess I've been surprised so many times by things in the writing groups. Maybe I'd kind of got used to getting it surprising. One thing I remember, there was a scene when they go to the spaceport, I think, and I'd done a lot of, because you're supposed to show not tell ideally, right? So I'd kind of really try to embrace that a bit too much. But that means you have to write a lot more sometimes to do the same thing. And the feedback on that point was, maybe this is the time to tell, not show, because you're just taking ages to get
back to the story. Back to the story.
It's actually, super essential. Yeah, it's nice, but it's slowing it down a lot, and it's quite big already, sort of thing. So. And I thought, I suppose that is true, and that makes sense, and so I culled a lot of darlings in that scene.
That's good.
But I guess it's saved somewhere for the special edition whenever it's selling millions of copies. And
you could bring back the expanded version. Yeah. I don't think I was surprised. I remember having quite a few conversations with my editor. They would say things. Do you really mean this? And I was going. Most of the time, it's like, yes, I do. That's the reason I've done it that way is because that's a thing in the universe. And it was getting over some of the it's like that because that's the way the universe works, although it sounds a bit weird, but it kind of was okay. So some of it was the translation of what was in my head in terms of I knew all the overall background lore, and somebody tried to edit this was trying to go, I don't quite understand what you're trying to do here, but I'll kind of go with it if it's okay. So we had a few conversations like that, I think.
I got to those bits yet, you think, or don't worry.
Possibly not. No, I think it's probably in the third book. I say that some of that stuff gets a bit wacky, but I can't remember now. It's been a while because I finished Shadewood in. Well, I started. The first book came out in 2015, I think, and I started writing that in about 2010. That's when I got the idea for it, and I think I finished the last one in 2020. So it's kind of Shadewood to me feels like something I did a while ago now.
Are you, or like
so I'm working. I've literally today got myself over a bit of a difficult bit in the story. I generally work on about 120,000 words per novel, and I've just got to 80,000. So I'm about 2/3 of the way through, which is a bit behind schedule. Alas, I'm supposed to have finished it this year. I think dare I say it's probably not going to happen in time for Christmas because I just don't have the time. But which is annoying because that's what I planned for. A few people will probably be like, no, really? So I am working on it as fast as I can, but real life, unfortunately, alas, keeps getting in the way, which is really, really irritating. But it is coming. And what I wanted to do is, basically take the Shadewood universe, because there is a bit of lore and a bit of history behind it, which I worked out in advance so I could write the Shadewood saga, but I didn't really refer to it in the Shadewood saga. And so I've used that as the background for painting a wider story. I probably can't tell you
Okay.
too much about that because it's kind of
Yeah.
spoilers for what you haven't come across yet. But
Um,
you'll get this. So basically, there is somewhere else to go. The other thing that I do plan on doing is actually one of the things that really surprised me coming out of the back of the Shaper side was an awful lot of people were very keen on the ship, the Mobilis,
Oh yeah.
as almost not quite a character, but certainly as a thing in the story. And basically, so in Shadewood, and this isn't really spoilers. Is obviously the crew have got the ship and they use it to, tool around the planet. Um,
Yeah.
but the question obviously is, well, hang on, that ship obviously clearly has some sort of history itself. So where did it come from, and what was it doing before the guys who are using it in Shapewood were using it? And so
Yeah.
I do plan on doing a previous voyages of the Mobilis. I need to come up with a snappier title of that, but I need to come up with a possibly a kind of not quite a prequel, but maybe set a few hundred years before Shapewood, as to what was going on that led to that ship being abandoned where it was, and so that the current Shapewood crew could go and find it. And I haven't figured out what that is yet, but I might go back and do that as well. And I also want to write the arrival at Shadewood. So Shadewood is
Okay.
sort of 2,000 years, I suppose, after some sort of colonization event of some kind, based on the history of the planet. But why were they there? How did they get there? What happened to make them leave Earth to get there, and all those sort of things. And I've got that kind of plotted out in vague terms at the moment. So I've probably got another like 10 novels in that whole
Oh yeah.
Shadewood universe to write, and I need to get on with it actually because otherwise I'm going to be an old man before I finish it. There's plenty more to do. And what's quite nice about it is I've sort of created myself, not really intentionally actually. It wasn't like a big plan. Right, I will write a 20 novel massive universe of stuff, but it kind of came out of the fact that I wrote Shadewood and it turned out to be 4 books, and then I worked out so much other stuff in order to make Shadewood work for me that I've actually got all the kind of background for a much larger series of novels, which is a happy kind of accident, I think. So
Yeah. I definitely have ideas for prequels and sequels for my stuff.
so that's so
I
good. So on that note, what's on the immediate horizon? Can we expect Gravity's Arrow the sequel anytime soon, or
Yes. So, I mean, I was getting into the sequel. It was going to be 3 books set when Firo is in his 20s and he's living in a different empire and he's making the transition from being a sort of successful military person into politics. So it's
okay?
the society he's going to find himself in is a bit like Roman times. They do a bit of military stuff. They kind of dabble in politics and military work, and then kind of ascend a sort of ladder of sort of hierarchy, and then become established senators and that kind of thing. So
Okay, yep. So a
doing
strong theme of politics going through there again. Yeah,
yeah,
yep.
and he's ascending there. The war with the Credate is still ongoing, and he's involved in that. But also he's detecting some shenanigan type stuff, even in his own empire
Yep.
that he's suspicious of. And his best friend, or one of his best friends, is murdered at the start, and so he's sort of trying to figure out who did that and why. And it doesn't make any sense, and
Okay.
trying to uncover what of the, why did that even happen. And that sort of leads him into sort of questioning a lot of things about the world he lives in and those sorts of things. And it was going to be over 3 books. Maybe it'll be 4. I feel like 3 would be a nice number. And
People like
it the
trilogies.
plot,
Trilogies are good.
yeah.
Quality
And
trilogies are
you
good
done
as well.
before,
Yeah.
so I was going to ask
Yeah.
you
That.
actually what made you before.
Well, oddly enough, I originally was planning to do 5, but when I worked out all of the stuff, I thought it doesn't really need to be 5 books long, um, and I thought stretching it to 5 books would be a bit too much. In hindsight, so basically what I did, I decided to make it 4. In hindsight, I um, I may have been better doing 5,
Okay.
because I did get a few reviews of book 3 saying it's really good, but it does feel quite rushed. It feels like things are moving on
Uh,
really really fast, and your characters almost
okay.
don't get a chance to breathe because they're on to the next crisis before they're almost
Yeah.
at the moment they've resolved the last one, kind of thing. So um, and so I could have possibly toned the pace of book 3 down a little bit and made it a little bit less frenetic. And book 4, as Glenn's pointed out in the chat, is bigger than the rest by probably like 10-15%.
No.
So there probably was space for 5 books, but when I think about it now, I can't think where I would have ended the
Yeah.
Phantom Book 3 and the Phantom Book 4, if you see
Yeah.
what I mean. I'm not quite sure where I would have ended them, because the ending points that I chose for 2 and 3, I suppose, to me made sense in the overall kind of arc of the story. Which obviously I can't tell you because you don't know that yet, but yeah, you'll get there. You'll see what I mean.
I know
So
what you mean. Yeah.
so it kind of felt right, but it's not quite optimal, I think. So that's possibly something to do with my plot. So my current one is also going to be 4 books. 4 books seems to be a thing that I'm now planning on aiming at, just to kind of make it work. So trilogies are, I suppose, more traditional, but I didn't feel like I could do justice to the entire thing in 3 books. I just had too much material. So yeah, so that's how I did it. It ended up as 4 books. The other thing I always have is this kind of weird little thing that I do with the titles of the books. So with Shadewood, all the words began with E and ended in shun, because reasons, right? I haven't really got a particular reason for it, but once I'd started it, I thought I'm going to keep going with that, and the title of each book gives you a subtle hint as to the nature of that part of the story, if that makes sense. So I think you've got emanation, exoneration, innovation, and expiation. If you look those words up and their meanings, they'll tell you roughly the beats in that particular part of the story. That's sort of what I did. The next series will probably be the same, in the sense there'll be 4 books and it'll do something similar. So we'll see how we go. So yeah, I don't know whether quadrilogies are better than trilogies or not, but that's what I've done.
Yeah, I'll see where mine ends up. I think I agree. I've got in my head reasonable, appropriate breaks for 3 books.
Yep.
But then at the same time, sometimes I'm worrying I'm trying to cramp. And that's it. I had an idea as I was thinking about the political shenanigans and stuff. I've been listening to podcasts and learning about revolutions in history. There's a guy, Mike Dunn, his podcast on revolutions, and I'm a big fan of those. And I've just been interested to know how they happen and what happens in them, and the circumstances that lead to one group winning or losing or whatever. And I feel like, having done that sort of research, if you like, I feel like there's something more I could add to my story, as some kind of crazy stuff does happen with the government. But I'm not quite sure.
There's certainly plenty of crazy stuff to use, isn't there?
Yeah, I know, because it works quite well as it is, but I think if I introduce these ingredients, then would it mess it up? And yeah, so maybe end up having to be another book to include those things to make it sort of seem real.
And you've got to go with what feels right as the author.
Yeah.
You get a feel for it, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah.
A few people commenting on that one, actually. Big Boo says, I actually love this is a shame, but I actually love the speed of book 3. I thought it was just meant to be that pace. It felt right. So yeah, so there's the alternative view. That's okay. That's nice.
Anyway,
yeah.
Brilliant.
Book 4, I'd have loved more in the ending, but that's much to be wanting more time with the characters. So I'm just aware of that. So that's quite good.
Okay.
First time chat from Pauline as well. Hello, Pauline. Good to see you. Thank you very much. Looking forward to reading all of these books. So that's always nice. And first time chat from Al Graham, I think. Question from him as well. Hi, Jack. Who would play Vero in a film?
Oh, gosh. I figured him being a child means that if I was ever lucky enough for there to be a film of this, then, which is, I bet to be quite lucky, I think, then it would probably depend on who's come of age at that time.
I suppose if you need a child actor, you can't really choose one now, can you?
Yeah. I know.
I mean, I suppose you could do, if you were allowed to choose anybody from any time period, regardless of their age, and then make them young again. Would you?
I mean, yeah. I also have another reason I don't think about it too hard is because I've deliberately avoided describing the skin color of all the characters, so that it's sort of potentially.
You can do whatever you like with it. Yep.
Potentially like the kind of raceless sort of characters, so they could be any race that you want them to be, sort of thing.
Yep.
And someone just suggested I could have my own children play my son Brian.
Yay!
He's good at acting.
Well, as long as they can act, that's the main thing, isn't it?
Yeah, he is good, actually. He's very good. He did a good Macbeth at school the other day, and he's just very good, as well as learning the tests and things.
That's an interesting point about the not being very specific about some the characters in terms of their appearance necessarily. I mean, what I tend to do with mine is I do tend to concentrate on hair color and eye color, because I find them quite useful ways to distinguish
Yeah.
between people. But I leave the rest kind of up to the imagination of the reader. I think I've got Kiri with black hair and she's got blue eyes, which felt to me like quite a distinctive combination. You'd notice that if you met somebody with that combination, and that was deliberate to make her stand out a bit. Maru is sort of quite nondescript. I think he's got tousled brown hair and brown eyes, and that's about it. And Zoella, I think is I'm just trying to remember now. I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember. I suppose I concentrated more on their personalities rather than their physical description. I don't really say much about what they look like at all. I'll leave that to you as the imagination of the reader. So if you want to imagine them with different skin colours, that's absolutely fine. I don't think that's an issue. It's much more about what the characters are like in terms of the way they act. That's kind of important. I do call it out in book 3, which you won't have read yet. There is a land to the south. Well, not to the south. I can't say that. See, that's the problem. To the sunward, shall I say? Where obviously the radiation's stronger, so they've got darker skin pigment, and that's just because that's where they live. And I have called that out specifically in book 3 because I felt it was important to make the distinction that they live in the hotter part of the world, and that only seemed natural to me. But other than that, I haven't really. I never call that sort of thing out, and I think particularly in a science fiction novel where your characters are maybe in spacecraft and all over the shop and come from all sorts of different backgrounds that are all kind of ethnically mixed up because of space travel, then I sometimes give a clue with the name because it's quite fun sometimes to just put some names in that are have ethnic origins but not necessarily call out that they're from that ethnic group because of their name. That's just a cool name that I like. I think it's one of those areas which can be a bit of a minefield, though. So I think you've got to be you've got to be a bit wary of it.
Yeah, I guess I'm imagining mine is set thousands of years in the future, whereas I'm imagining race doesn't matter much, but then there are other species. But I'm almost kind of make that not matter too much either. So the other sentient species that travel the stars and interact on a kind of daily basis with humans, they kind of I'm not having any racism between any of them really, if I can avoid it. And so, or speciesism, and so
speciesism is the thing. Yes, that's right.
There could be a lot of color variation in all the characters and all the species, and I'm gonna imagine that's not gonna matter. I'm trying to imagine a world where it doesn't matter anyway.
Wouldn't that be a good place? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I suppose that brings us on to almost a wrapping up question. In that kind of light, I mean, if I was asked, does Shadewood have a message? I would say it probably doesn't have an overt message. It's a combination of ideas. It's religion versus technology. It's people versus places. It's indoctrination versus education. It's all of those sort of things. But it doesn't basically say, right, this is what you should be thinking, or this is what I want you to consider, or this is the in that horrible kind of 80s 70s way, this is the lesson you should be taking away from this story, children. It's not like that, but it's got themes of if you don't look after things, bad things happen. If you don't, if you allow people to be indoctrinated, bad things will happen. If you don't take action when people do bad things wrong, then the good people will suffer. It's got messages like that in it, but nothing I suppose that I would say is applying to the real world. That's kind of my view. I generally myself don't like that sort of almost preachiness in stories. I'm not trying to tell anybody how to think, but if they take away from my books, being nice to people and maybe being a bit more tolerant of each other is a good thing, then I think that maybe that's good. But do you have anything like that inside Gravity's Arrow that you've deliberately put in there, or maybe inadvertently put in there? Do you feel like some of your world values have percolated into the book? Or
I'm sure I was conscious of not looking too preachy as well. I feel certainly the idea that we should question things generally is a useful thing to do, healthy thing to do. That's probably a message in there, which I think is pretty safe as a message. And that be wary of where various thinkings can take you. If you get too indoctrination, I guess, can be a dangerous thing and can lead you towards bad places and bad consequences. The message that if there are difficult things and bad things, you can avoid them, but then sometimes the right thing is to challenge them, and even though that's
Yeah.
difficult and risky, probably is the right thing to do. Get people thinking about what is the right thing to do, but not telling them what that is necessarily at all. And then what was the other thing? Yeah, I feel something else you said, I'm sure. But yeah, just kind of, yeah, I think just getting people encouraging thinking about these sorts of things, I think is important. But I suppose the main thing, yeah, I think encourage thinking along these lines, having thoughts and questioning about these sorts of these important things, which people tend to often avoid talking about, I think, and then at the same time have it really good fun and exciting.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, you're telling a story for entertainment purposes,
Yeah.
aren't you? You don't want it to be a really heavy tome necessarily.
Yeah,
Matt Monkson's actually asked that question. I mean, it's an interesting question. Why does everyone, I suppose, in the context of what we're talking here, why do writers quite often avoid racism these days when clearly it exists in the real world? Are we a bit worried about putting it in our novels because maybe that sort of makes it look like we're supporting the status quo, or do we avoid it because it's just a difficult subject, or are we looking at a utopia where it no longer exists?
yeah.
It's quite a deep question, actually.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a utopia. It's the kind of utopian idea in the story, which is already filled with lots of dystopian things anyway. So I guess that particular aspect is a utopian vision of where we might want. We can look to that as we will one day be where race doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Species doesn't matter, and so that's why it's like that for my story. But yeah, I mean, it is a thing.
It is, yeah. I must admit, in Shapewood, I thought about it, but when I was concentrating on specifically, I suppose I was trying to do. I was thinking more about sexism, actually. If I think about it in Shapewood, because what I basically thought, there is this, whether you agree or not, there's this idea that the patriarchy exists in our world where men have been in charge of religion and things for a long, long time and set the rules, and women haven't had the vote and various other bits and pieces historically, all those sort of stuff. And I thought, well, okay, one of the things I could do in Shapewood is turn it on its head a bit, and I've basically given the women not necessarily just the authority, but I've also actually given them a significant power which the men do not possess, they can't possess due to the way it works. So I've actually enhanced it and basically said, okay, so let's play that out. What does that look like? And that's so I've sort of, I suppose I've gone down the route of a bit of sexism in the sense that actually women in this universe are superior in the sense that they have this ability to execute this power which the men can't do. So and in any situation, for example, Kiri has the opportunity to overpower other people because she can just overpower them mentally, and that means that she views people, I suppose, some people are therefore inferior because they can't do that. And it's a sort of reverse sexism, I suppose. Maybe, I'm not quite sure that's the right phrase, but that's kind of where I was going with that one. Yeah,
it's another way of discussing the same problem in a different way that helps you think about it. It's very good. They're very kind of dismissive and derogatory towards men, aren't they? They're sort of
they're arrogant, and I've taken attitudes like that I've experienced the other way around, obviously in the workplace and various other things where people would. I mean, I used to have I ran a department in a big corporate company, and I was always fighting for the women in my department to be paid the same as the blokes for doing the same job, and it seemed to be a perfectly normal, logical thing. Why on earth would it be different? But it was. And I remember inheriting a team, where probably about 30% of them were women, and they weren't paid as much as the rest of the guys. And I was like, so I went to HR and basically said, well, this is wrong. They're doing the same job. What can I do, to fix this? And then basically it took me like 3 years to even out the salaries. Within the well, I mean, I did manage to do it, fortunately, but that's how long it took within the corporative guidelines that I was working with. And I just thought, if we switch that around and suddenly men are on the back foot by the nature of being men, they don't have the superpower that the women have, then we can explore it from a different perspective. And then I thought I can make it a bit more nuanced than that only some of the women have this power, not all of them. It's maybe 1%, 5% of the population only that has this power. So then there's like two levels of being women in this universe, where you almost have a class structure. Well, we're the priestesses, and you aren't. So and you start being able to play around with those dynamics as well.
Yeah, well done on you for trying to fix things. I find working in organizations and pointing out problems is a tough thing, and organizations are often very set in their ways, and it's a struggle to change cultures and attitudes. I'd be interested to know what they said to you when you tried to change things, if you want to talk about that. But,
well, actually, the biggest problems I had was I was I was given here's your budget for increasing salaries. You have a total budget of, let's say, £300,000 or whatever it was that you can assign to your 50 staff each. But you can only make there were rules like you can only make somebody's salary increase by a certain percentage within a certain period of time. So my problem was that if I had a woman in my team who was working pretty well, let's say not the top performer in the team, but working really well, but not necessarily the best. If I gave her the maximum increase, it meant I couldn't give one of the guys who actually was really knocking it out of the park. I couldn't give him a salary increase at all, because in order to make all the numbers balance, I had to make choices between trying to equalise the salaries or actually rewarding the people who are doing the best job. Yeah. And it was really, really difficult to kind of balance those kind of things off. And then, once I'd made my decision, I had to justify it to the people I was giving or not, the pay rises too. It was very, very hard work. Whereas in the real, if I'd been in charge of it, I'd basically say, look, I want to be able to give these people this salary now.
Yeah.
Which in some
cases,
hope
the organisation embrace your idea and sort of, buy into the idea that you're promoting and just.
The oddest thing was that the HR department, which I was having most of the fights with, were 80% women. And I was arguing this. I want to promote all the women in my organisation, and I was arguing that with women, saying, no, you can't do that. So. What are we trying to do here? What are we trying to win? It was very strange, very strange. Corporate politics and things are very, very odd.
Well done for trying, is all I can say. So many people would not try, and
well, that's it, isn't it? I think you have to try and do the best you can when you're in the situation. Yeah. So Mad Monksoft, he's apologised. He's had too much rum, but he says women should be the dominant sex as they're in control of everything. A comment made as a husband. I think he's definitely had too much rum, poor old fella. So Alan says a woman who worked for me once had to be given several pay rises over several years to bring her up to a reasonable level. Yeah, so that's definitely the experience I had with many of my staff actually. So that's interesting. Pauline says, my editor didn't want my heroine to think someone was fat. She was trying to make my character more politically correct, but it's a character, not a saint, and doesn't have to be polite. Do politically correct characters sell more books? That's a good question. I don't know. Do you have to tone down? Have you toned down characters because the character has an unpopular opinion?
I guess if a character you're supposed to be rooting for has an unpopular opinion, that could be an issue, couldn't it? Not necessarily selling books, but in terms of morally, you're kind of encouraging readers to buy into the idea that maybe those views are okay. Whereas if a character that's a side character or someone that is viewed at with some criticism or whatever has dodgy views, that's good. It's a good way of trying to discuss and talk about these things. But I think one should be careful about the characters that you're wanting the readers to kind of buy into and endorse and back and root for. If they're having dodgy views, that's probably not a good thing for the world.
Right. I think it's a tough one, isn't it? Because like you say, if you're reflecting the real world, you're going to have people who are bigoted, people who are racist, people who are sexist, all those things, because that's a real mix of character flaws that are genuinely out there, and it kind of makes sense. My approach has always been to have those characters as minor characters. So your main characters are flawed, but hopefully kind of acceptable kind of characters, unless they're they're specifically really messed up.
That it demonstrates that it's not okay to think those things.
And I tend to, I suppose, ultimately my book should have an uplifting message. So it's not quite in the good will always triumph kind of category, but it's kind of like the right sort of things tend to lead to the right sort of resolutions kind of approach, and the less salubrious aspects of human personality tend to get their comeuppance, as if there's some sort of karma in the universe. That's how I tend to approach it in my stories. And the nasty, I do put some nasty characters in, but I don't give them much airtime. So if there is a character who my mum would describe as I suppose a nasty piece of work, they're not in for very long, and they're fairly clearly telegraphed as that's not a very nice character. Yes. And usually something bad happens to them. So that's how I approach it. That may not be the only solution, but and Glenn says actually, no matter what you do with characters, you'll probably find a reader who will criticise you for portraying them one way or the other anyway. So you probably can't please all the people all the time, can you? So that's the thing. So I suppose when can we expect them? When can we expect the sequel to Gravity's Arrow? How long have we got to wait?
Right, realistically, because I really like to write or draft all the books before I finish the first one. Because I'd like to know exactly what it goes. I don't have any plot hole error things that I've sabotaged my first book with by writing the third book. So, but if I can get into that zone where I can do the one super fast draft sort of thing of everything.
Yeah.
And shall I aim realistically for 2 years, or is that being too pessimistic or optimistic? I mean,
well, you've got a very demanding day job as well, and you're a parent of 3 children, so you've got to be realistic as well, right?
Let's say that 2 years, and then
2 years. Okay, so we'll definitely come back. What's that? 2024. We'll see how you're doing. That'll be quite good.
I'll aim faster than that. But that's reasonable.
Aim faster than that. That'd be really good. That's awesome. Right, Jack. I think we've been chatting for almost 2 hours actually, which is excellent. Really enjoyed it. So thank you very much for joining us on the stream. Anne's just reminded me that there's a video premiere regarding Gravity's Arrow on the 21st of October. So there's a link there for everybody in the chat who wants to go and read it and look onto that. I suppose just in wrapping up then, so we've talked about what's kind of coming next. What's your long-term aspirations then? Do you want to give up the day job and become a writer full time, or do you dream of your book being turned into a film or a TV series? What would Nirvana? What would success? What would the perfect ending to this story be?
I do tend to dream big, but I also have realistic considerations. So. Yes, of course, I'd love it if those things happen, but I have to be realistic that the percentage chance of that happening is very small.
Yep.
And my day job pays well. To make that kind of money doing this, writing, it would be very tough. And I think the percentage of people that could make that much money writing is going to be very small.
It's minuscule. Very minuscule.
So realistically, a realistic ambition would be that I've written lots and lots of books by the time I retire or after that, and then maybe somewhat, people enjoy them and maybe they do well. Of course, a crazy dream would be that they get taken up and spiral into something bigger and go somewhere great. But that, got to
be realistic.
I'm unhappy that didn't happen, So.
No, I think that's a very healthy way of looking at it, and I think one of the biggest pieces of advice is given to lots of writers is don't give up the day job, whatever you do, which is sensible, particularly if you've got the career in it and it's paying the bills. That's a big amount of pressure you haven't got to worry about, and using it as a creative outlet, seems very pragmatic to me.
Therapeutic. It's really, I really like it. It's really, I think it makes me a happier person doing this.
Good.
So,
Yeah. Well, you've got a fantastic talent, so I can thoroughly recommend to everybody to chat. Enjoy Gravity's Arrow. It's an excellent book. I enjoyed it a lot, so I'm looking forward to the sequel when it arrives. So get writing. And it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the stream, Jack. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
No problem at all. Right, I will sign off there for the chat. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us this evening. It's been great fun. Lots of questions as well, so thank you for all those. Obviously, I'm back with my usual streaming schedule, so keep an eye on that kind of stuff. More stuff going on. But thank you all. Thank you very much, and we'll be back again soon. So take care of yourself. Have a fantastic week, and as always, keep writing, my friends. Keep writing. It's all good stuff. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye bye now.